The first light of dawn crept hesitantly over the edge of the world, painting the eastern horizon in muted shades of rose and gold. For most of humanity, it was an ordinary morning. Cars wheeled onto congested highways, children argued over cereal, flavors, and office drones slave-drudged toward their cubicles. Yet in those first fragile minutes of July 9, 2042, everything changed. 1.1. A rogue signal at 5:03 UTC. The Orbital Observation Network registered an anomaly. Deep Space Telescope aimed at distant nebulae snapped back data showing an object massive, angular, unlike any known satellite or debris drifting into low Earth orbit. Cecilia Morales, chief analyst at OON's California Operations Center, stared at the spectrographic readouts in disbelief. "Is that glowing?" she whispered to her colleague. Inertial dampers humming in the background as the station rotated to track the craft. On screen, the vessel's silhouette shimmered with pulsating bands of cobalt and silver. Like a living gemstone, her pulse quickened. Cross-check with the international relay feed. Within seconds, screens flickered to life across every monitoring station on 6 continents. All saw the same, a colossal ship, at least 3 kilometers long, hanging motionless above Earth's trembling surface. 1.2. Global uncertainty news of the silent intruder spread faster than wildfire. Live broadcasts cut into breakfast shows. Social media lit up with conspiracy theories and pixelated phone videos. In London, Prime Minister Adito Kunbo Adeboale convened an emergency COBRA meeting. In Beijing, President Li Wei dispatched envoy teams to U.S. counterparts, only to find them already en route. In Brasilia, journalists speculated that the craft might be rogue geoengineering gone awry. While in Moscow, defense chiefs debated whether to mobilize the new S-500 systems. Yet no one pulled a trigger. If this was an attack, an immediate missile salvo would have been expected. Instead, the ship remained eerily inert. Its hull unfurled filigreed tendrils, vast spines of bioluminescent metal that snaked toward Earth's communication satellites. They clamped onto relay nodes, disrupting signals in patterns too precise for solar storms. It was a systematic seizure of the planet's nervous system. 1.3. The ultimatum. 2 hours later, a voice crackled through every broadcast channel, every phone network, and every internet stream. An alien voice, translated instantaneously into every major human language. Flat and emotionless, people of Earth, we are the Aurelians of the Ascendant. Collective, your world is to be annexed for resources and labor. Surrender peacefully and prepare for integration. Resistance will be met with termination. There was no rhetoric, no plea for understanding, only the cold decree of an empire that viewed humanity as ants beneath its tread. Governments scrambled to respond, but their voices were choked by static bursts controlled by the Aurelians. Diplomacy fractured as each nation's delegation was cut off. No envoy could pass the newly erected veil of alien interference. 1.4. Fractured alliance beneath the veneer of global unity. The world's superpowers quarreled fiercely. The United States ordered DEFCON levels to rise. Canada mobilized its northern militia reserves. And the European Union debated whether to arm its civilian population under Article 51. Russia heralded the crisis as proof of Western weakness, while China called for a joint human council on olive branch, swiftly ignored by Washington and Moscow. In the shadow of these machinations, smaller states watched with trepidation. Kenya's president declared a state of emergency, deploying troops to guard vital infrastructure. Argentina's scientists urged calm, cautioning that panic would play directly into the invaders' hands. But fear spread faster than reason, and soon rumors of panic buying, uprisings, and coups flickered through the global tapestry. 1.5. Seeds of defeat was in the midst of this chaos that pockets of resistance began to form. They were the marginalized, disillusioned soldiers haunted by failed campaigns, renegade engineers who had been fired for bending safety regulations, and idealistic students who saw in the alien ultimatum a final test of humanity's spirit. In a clandestine silo beneath Kyiv's ruins, Captain Alina Petrov pored over schematics of Aurelian drones. She had been seconded from the Ukrainian Air Force, her unit decimated by the initial orbital bombardments. Now, with only a handful of loyalists, she vowed to turn the invaders' own technology against them. Outside, her men lit improvised torches beacons to signal Allied forces that the fight was on. Across the Atlantic, in a converted subway station beneath New York City, former NASA engineer Jamal Thompson tested electromagnetic pulse devices cobbled together from discarded satellite components. His lab was a warren of wires and circuit boards, and every night, the city overhead flickered as his team ran covert trials on decommissioned Cobra microwave towers. Thompson's goal was audacious: to blind the Aurelians' sensor networks, long enough for human fighters to strike back. Even in the heart of Tokyo, University professor Hana Sakamoto gathered an unlikely cohort: mathematicians, linguists, and hackers. They called themselves Project Babel, determined to decipher the patterns in the Aurelians' transmissions. If humanity could understand the alien language, however stripped of nuance, it might exploit loopholes or sow confusion among the invaders' ranks. 1.6 Voices of the ordinary, but not all defiance was technical or covert. On the streets, ordinary people found ways to resist. In Mumbai, street vendors formed human chains around vital telecommunication towers, risking life and limb to prevent the Aurelians from seizing them. In Sao Paulo, samba dancers and percussionists flooded plazas, drumming rhythms so loud and disorienting that they disrupted the frequency bands used by enemy drones. In Cairo, religious leaders from every faith came together, hosting prayer vigils that filled the desert air with chants and songs, an audible assertion of unity against the invaders' silence. Social media, too, became a battlefield. Hashtags like #WeAreEarth and #FightBack trended globally. Amateur videographers posted videos of burning drones shot down by armed civilians. Meme makers reimagined the alien ultimatum as a challenge rather than a threat. In digital forums and encrypted chat rooms, believers and skeptics clashed, but one sentiment prevailed: humanity would not quietly step aside. 1.7 The calm before the siege. By the end of the first 24 hours, the world had reorganized itself into two uneasy blocks: the collaborators, those governments still paralyzed by fear, negotiating in secret for terms of surrender, and the resistance cells, a loose network of militias, scientists, and ordinary citizens determined to fight. Overhead, the Aurelians stationed larger dreadnoughts, ominous as floating fortresses, while their drones buzzed like metallic locusts, harvesting data and sowing terror. Across the globe, in dimly lit war rooms and hidden laboratories, humans labored feverishly. They were days, hours, perhaps minutes away from the moment when passive observation would give way to active rebellion. And yet, as the sun slipped below the horizon on that first terrifying day, there was something remarkable in the air: a hum of restless energy, a collective heartbeat of defiance. It was the quiet before the storm, the final pause before humanity's answer rang out across the cosmos. 1.8 A flicker of hope in her cramped California command center. Cecilia Morales watched live feeds of resistance strikes, flashes of laser fire against alien shields, drones plummeting in smoldering spirals. She closed her eyes, remembering why she had devoted her life to space exploration. For moments like this, when the unknown became a catalyst for unity rather than fear. Beside her, the director tapped a sequence into his console. "Initiate Project Echo," he ordered. On screens across the station, a new symbol ignited, a stylized phoenix rising from broken circuitry. It would be humanity's rallying banner, an emblem of rebirth forged in the crucible of extinction. As night settled, ships of the Ascendant Collective loomed overhead like silent judges. But on the ground, within hidden bunkers and darkened plazas, humanity's heartbeat quickened. The Aurelians believed we would cower. They had underestimated our capacity for hope, and they did not yet know how brightly it could burn. The sky had fallen once, but humanity was not yet broken. When the Aurelians unleashed their first wave of shock drones, sleek, darting machines bristling with crystalline weapons, Earth's defenders were ready, not with polished fleets or coordinated strikes, but with raw ingenuity born of desperation. 1 Shock and a wet to 47 UTC on July 11, 2042. The first shock drones descended over Khartoum. They arrived in silent swarms, moving like living constellations. Their weapons fired crystalline bolts that tore through concrete and steel alike, carving trenches in reinforced bunkers. Civilians scattered as buildings disintegrated in bursts of pale blue light. But Khartoum's defenders had anticipated the strike. Under the desert sands, a network of repurposed oil pipelines had been retrofitted to vent thermite charges. As the first drone hovered for targeting, a controlled ignition below ripped at its undercarriage. The drone collapsed in a cascade of molten metal, its crystalline core shattering into diamond shards across the sand. News of Khartoum's gambit spread through encrypted resistance channels. If one city could fend off the opening strike, others might follow. To improvised defenses across the globe. Resistance cells scavenged every scrap of technology they could find. Meteorological balloons in Scandinavia, climate scientists repurposed. Weather balloons, equipping them with improvised jammers harvested from decommissioned naval radar. When the Aurelians' drones attempted to lock onto terrestrial transmitters, the balloons rose into the stratosphere and unleashed clouds of electronic noise, scrambling targeting arrays and sending drones crashing in erratic spirals. Anti-aircraft Gatling turrets in the American Midwest. Auto manufacturers converted factory floor robotic arms into rapid-fire turrets, feeding them with depleted uranium slugs. From retired tank batteries, they created makeshift hail guns that could pepper swarms of drones with a storm of projectiles. In Wichita, Kansas, one such turret downed over 30 drones in under 5 minutes. Satellite Kamikaze is a battered communications satellite once used for global internet service. Was hijacked by cybersecurity volunteers in Chennai. They embedded self-destruct routines and adjusted its orbit. When the Aurelians' command uplink attempted to use the satellite as a relay node, the volunteers triggered the code, sending it careening into the lower thermosphere, colliding with an enemy dreadnought's sensor array and crippling its main targeting grid. Each victory was small and costly. Hundreds of civilians and soldiers sacrificed in the execution. But every drone felled was a signal. Humanity would not surrender. Its skies. 3. Urban guerrilla warfare in megacities turned battlegrounds. The war took a visceral, ground-level turn. Nairobi's solar pulse under the broken silhouette of the Kenyatta International Conference Center. Engineers rigged solar concentrators salvaged from decommissioned farms. By day, they soaked up the sun. By night, they focused that energy into bursts of microwave radiation. When a wave of attackers descended, the array fired a beam so intense it melted drone circuitry in midair, sending their remains to crash like burnt butterflies. Sao Paulo's metal forges, Brazil's underground forges roared to life beneath Avenida Paulista. Blacksmiths worked around the clock, forging tungsten flechettes shards long enough to penetrate the toughest of our alien shields. Mounted on hijacked city buses, makeshift railguns fired these flechettes at supersonic speeds. In one ambush, 20 drones were blasted from the sky before the invaders even knew what hit them. Berlin's sonic barrage acoustics researchers in the Berliner Dom captured the drone's own hum and inverted it. Arrays of speakers mounted on city rooftops unleashed rancorous howls, sound waves tuned to disrupt the drone's vibration-sensitive gyroscopes. Entire squadrons of automatons tumbled out of formation, crashing through tenements and plazas in chaotic cascades of scrap metal. 4. The cost of resistancia at these triumphs were shadowed by sacrifice. In Manila, a collapsed apartment block claimed dozens of lives when a drone's fallback thrusters detonated near civilians. In Sydney, a railgun misfire tore through an adjacent subway tunnel, trapping hundreds underground. Every blow struck against the Aurelians echoed back as reprisal. Orbital lasers carved gashes into the Earth's surface, flattening jungles and turning rivers to steam. Psychological tolls mounted as well. Resistance fighters suffered from constant exhaustion and grief. In Buenos Aires, a field hospital overflowed with amputees and burn victims. In Cairo, a refugee camp became a detention center when local militias suspected collaborators among the desperate families fleeing war zones. The line between hero and villain blurred, and in the crucible of total war, morality itself was tested. 5. Network of defiance amid the chaos. A global covert infrastructure took shape. Project Babel's breakthrough deep in Tokyo's subterranean labs. Hana Sakamoto's team cracked the code to the Aurelians' address protocols. By reverse engineering their signal syntax, they engineered ghost packets that spoofed command hierarchies. For brief windows, human hackers could issue false directives, sending small squadrons of drones to chase phantom targets or return to the mothership, and then self-destruct upon docking. The Phoenix Initiative back in California, at a clandestine facility. Dr. Mei Lin convened a conference call with representatives from every major resistance node. On breakout screens, she outlined a radical concept. What if Earth could weaponize its own geothermal core? What if, instead of chasing drones across continents, we shoved a lance of pure, planetary energy straight at the invaders? Her prototype, a bioreactor designed to trigger controlled magma flows, was the size of a cruise ship, and twice as temperamental. It could, in theory, generate a plasma column capable of breaching Aurelian hulls. But installing and activating it would require a near impossible gamble. Transporting the reactor across hostile airspace, securing it in the Andes, and waiting for the precise alignment of tectonic pressure. Cecilia's signal network. Meanwhile, Cecilia Morales repurposed the OON's deep space mesh into an earthbound communications grid. Through a series of microsatellites and high-altitude UAV relays, she created a parallel internet, a hidden artery immune to Aurelian jamming resistance. Cells around the globe plugged in, sharing real-time intelligence, strike coordinates, and resource inventories. For the first time, frontline fighters across 6 continents felt connected by a single purpose. 6 moments of unity in pockets of resistance. Moments of unexpected solidarity shimmered. In Accra, Muslim and Christian leaders joined to escort a convoy of wounded soldiers to safety, sharing prayer mats and medical supplies with equal reverence. Along the U.S.-Canada border, militias once at odds for political reasons set aside their grievances to establish a joint patrol, intercepting supply trains and defending refugee columns together. In the Arctic Circle, former oil rig workers guided Inuit hunters to repurpose ice floes as stealth platforms, lending indigenous expertise to the global struggle. These alliances were fragile, built on slender threads of necessity rather than trust, but they held. Humanity was remembering that the invader's identity mattered less than our shared stakes. 7. The spark before the flame. Be the close of Chapter 2. The embers of rebellion glowing across every theater of conflict. The world had been irrevocably altered. The Aurelians, accustomed to planetary conquests achieved through sheer might, now faced an adversary as unpredictable as it was tenacious. Our weapons were crude, our tactics improvised. Yet every explosive bolt, every hacked transmission, every fusion of magma and machine forged a new legend that in the face of cosmic tyranny, humanity would not fold. And at the center of it all stood a decision to continue fragmentary skirmishes that bled both sides, or to strike at the heart of the invaders with a weapon that could turn the tide or doom us all. In hidden war rooms and frost-bitten observation posts, scientists and soldiers whispered in the same breath, Project Phoenix. The embers burned bright, but would they coalesce into the inferno needed to shatter an empire? As the second chapter of our fight drew to a close, the answer hung in the balance, like a spark waiting for the wind. Beneath the frozen peaks of the Andes, where the air thins and the wind howls like a wounded beast, humanity's greatest gamble was about to ignite. Project Phoenix, an audacious bid to harness Earth's molten heart and turn it into a weapon, had moved from blueprint to battlefield. Now, under the light of a blood-red moon, the crucible of vengeance would be tested. 3.1. Mobilization. Under the blackout in the night of July 10, 2042. The world's power grids blinked off in synchronized sequence. A cyber warfare cell led by Jamal Thompson had executed the largest coordinated blackout in human history, from Los Angeles to Lagos. Lights died, satellites dimmed, and for the first time since the invasion began, the night belonged to humanity. Alone, under this shroud of darkness, A fleet of heavy lift transports slipped out of hidden airstrips across 6 continents. Each was loaded with segments of the Phoenix reactor, custom fabricated in secret shipyards under the guise of grain silos or luxury yachts. Brigadier General Kofi Adebayo watched on live feeds as Herculean C-17 Dragons lifted each segment. Toward South America, he felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. This mission was more than a strike. It was a reckoning. 3.2. The Andean Odysseys transports arched over the Pacific, descended toward the Peruvian Andes, and touched down at a makeshift runway carved into the flanks of Nevada Huascaran. There, in an abandoned gold mine, engineers had hollowed a chamber beneath the ice cap, a natural bastion against orbital scans, and drone patrols. Dr. Mei Lin emerged first, her breath pluming in the cold as she oversaw the offloading of the reactors. Biocore the size of a locomotive, its surface alive with bioluminescent veins. She remembered the months spent coaxing biological catalysts to survive extreme pressure and temperature, her nights haunted by visions of runaway fission or a reactor that simply refused to ignite. Now, standing on Antarctic hard ground at 6,000 meters elevation, every error would be fatal. Captain Alina Petrov's Special Forces unit formed a tight cordon around the cavern entrance. They had rehearsed this insertion in simulators and abandoned tunnels, but nothing prepared them for the piercing cold or the shriek of wind tunneling through jagged rock. Petrov's icy gaze never wavered as her team braced each reactor segment with cryogenic supports and interfaced them with geothermal conduits drilled into the molten reservoirs below. 3.3. Echoes of conflagration. While the Phoenix reactor was assembled, the Aurelians grew suspicious. Recon drones scoured the mountain passes, and patrol frigates flitted across the night sky like predatory moths. In Lima, resistance hackers intercepted an Aurelian field report, unidentified heat signature emerging from tectonic fissure. Recommend immediate investigation. With minutes to spare, Hana Sakamoto's Project Babel hackers injected false coordinates into the invaders' mapping protocols. Drones veered off to chase phantom hotspots in the Amazon basin, overshooting their true marks by hundreds of kilometers. The diversion held just long enough, but nothing stayed hidden forever. At 1:02 UTC, a shock battalion of wave-form assault drones descended into the valley, their crystalline chassis glowing a baleful purple. They cut down perimeter sentries with crystalline rays, their pulses carving trenches through snowdrifts as if they were clay. Rifle fire and anti-drone jammers lit up the night as Petrov's team braced for impact. 3.4. The siege of the ancients. The assault raged for 30 harrowing minutes. Aurelian drones darted between rock spurs, mortars improvised. From Scud-style warheads roared overhead. Below the cavern, geothermal vents vented superheated steam, sending crews scrambling for breaths of cold air. Messages blinked urgently on encrypted channels. Fortification breach. West sector compromised. Recommend reactor offline. Repeat. Reactor offline. But Dr. Lin's voice cut through the chaos. We initiated too long ago to back down. Hold them at bay. Petrov rallied her forces around the cryogenic flux emitters, experimental devices designed to freeze the drone's glycolic power cores. Each burst of sub-zero mist slowed enemy mechanisms to a crawl, causing drones to shudder and crash. Engineers hurled thermal grenades salvaged from decommissioned tanks into packs of attackers, turning crystalline casings brittle. Amid the fury, Cecilia Morales's clandestine network fed uplink targeting data to ground crews. Satellite optics hijacked and repurposed gave fighters a real-time map of drone movements, etched onto snowy slopes. Guided by that data, a coalition of Brazilian railgun crews and Kenyan solar pulse teams funneled the invaders into kill zones, shredding them in waves that glowed like sparks from a forge. 3.5. Activation protocol. As dawn threatened the horizon, Project Phoenix neared its critical phase. The reactor's core, now seated on magnetic dampers to isolate seismic feedback, hummed with confined power. Dr. Lin and her lead engineers initiated thermal coupling, a series of phased ignitions that would synchronize the molten magma with the bioreactive matrix inside the command bunker. Thompson and Sakamoto monitored the oscillation diagrams on giant holo screens. Every frequency spike, every pressure reading, had to fall within a razor-thin margin. If coupling failed, the reactor would implode or worse, unleash a localized eruption that could trigger an uncontained volcanic event. At 3:17 UTC, as the first pale sliver of sunlight brushed the mountaintops, Dr. Lin gave the go-ahead. Full ignition now. Massive valves opened, and for an instant, the cavern resonated with a deep, resonant growl like the planet itself flexing its bones. Then, in a blinding flash of white-hot plasma, a vertical column of superheated energy pierced the ice ceiling, carving a tunnel through the stratosphere. This lance of raw geothermal fury surged upward, its brilliance rivaling the rising sun. 3.6. The inferno ascends from orbit. Satellites saw the phoenix plume as a second sun blooming above Earth. Across every front line, human batteries fired. In unison, Tokyo's laser rays focused coherent beams into the plasma channel, amplifying its intensity. Nairobi's microwave emitters pulsed in harmony, destabilizing alien shields tuned to coherent frequencies. Berlin's sonic rigs reverberated at harmonic overtones, shattering crystalline hulls tuned to impervious resonances. Below Petrov's troops cheered as drones in the valley backpedaled, their weapon banks overloaded by feedback loops spiraling through the plasma conduit. One by one, the dreadnoughts orbiting the Andes were pierced. Mammoth hull plates buckled inward, crystalline struts liquefied, and ships erupted in cascades of molten alloy that rained down like shooting stars. In the command bunker, Dr. Lin exhaled, tears freezing on her cheeks. "It's working," she whispered, voice trembling. "We did it." 3.7. Sacrifices and triumphant victory carried a toll. The seismic shockwave from the reactor's discharge triggered avalanches that buried supply convoys, the energy conduit overridden by thermal feedback expelled scalding steam into the cavern, costing the lives of 24 engineers who stayed behind to manually reroute the flow. Petrov found Dr. Lin amidst the rubble of a collapsed support beam. The general's eyes were hard but proud. "You gave us the hammer," she said softly. "We'll keep swinging." As the sun fully rose on July 12, 2042, the sky above the Andes burned with our wrath, a banner of light that spoke not of conquest, but of defiance. Across the globe, human radio crackled with triumphant voices. Nova Scotia cheered. Manila danced in the streets. A choir in Paris sang the old hymn of resistance. Yet even in the aftermath, minds turned to the future. What of the fragments of our alien tech now scattered across Earth? Could humanity wield such power responsibly? Or would we, in our fury, become the thing we fought against? For now, though, the answer was written in the scorched mountain air. We had struck back. We had won the day, and in the crucible of vengeance, we had forged a new destiny, one born from fire, sacrifice, and unyielding resolve. The dawn that broke on July 13, 2042, was not the pale hush of a world at peace. It was a world reeling, battered by fire and thunder, yet breathing in the first true moment of freedom. Since the arrival of the Ascendant Collective, across shattered landscapes and scorched cities, survivors emerged into an uncertain light, blinking away the residue of fear that had clung to every waking moment. 1. Surveying the ruins from the summit of Nevado Huascaran, Brigadier General Kofi Adebayo watched the slow drift of alien wreckage tumbling toward the Amazon basin. He stood amid the frost-rimed skeleton of the Phoenix reactor's external support structure, now a silent monument to both triumph and sacrifice. Round him, engineer teams sealed the cavern's entrance and began dismantling the bioreactors. Core, salvaging what remained for study. "Never thought I'd live to see their ships fall," he murmured to Captain Alina Petrov, who joined him with a sparse nod. "And yet, look at the price we paid." Below, a helicopter kicked up a vortex of snow as it delivered the wounded, technicians with scorched lungs, soldiers with frostbite, and engineers whose hands had been twisted by melting metal. Each face carried a story of courage, loss, or regret. Kofi's eyes, steady as a mountain's flank, betrayed a flash of grief as he realized the tally of lives expended to carve human will into the Sky.for.2, a world reclaimed across the globe. The resonance of Phoenix's strike echoed in both ruin and reclamation. New Delhi, the massive drills of the former Aurelian mining platforms, once tearing at Earth's crust for alien minerals, lay silent. Human engineers powered down the crystalline extractors and began repurposing their frames into water purification towers, feeding clean drinking water to parched cities. Milan, the grand spire of the Aurelian communication array, now a shattered lattice of silver filaments, was cleared by volunteer crews from its fallen segments. Technicians scavenged microchips and optical fibers, jump-starting networks on the hidden echo grid that had sustained resistance cells in darkness. Cape Town, underneath Table Mountain, the old NATO bunkers converted to Aurelian triage centers had become makeshift hospitals. Medics from every continent flowed in to treat civilian survivors pulled from rubble. Children with fractured limbs, elders with radiation burns, and entire families succumbing to exposure. In narrow corridors lit by solar lanterns, humanity's collective compassion rivaled the cruelty that had preceded it. On every ruined boulevard and bleached battlefield, people labored to reclaim what had been lost. Rubble was cleared, bodies respectfully interred, and makeshift markets blossomed where supplies were shared freely. In that spirit of reclamation, local governments, some collapsed, some strengthened by resistance, credibility began cooperating. Across old rivalries, borders, once sealed by fear, opened to refugees bearing tales of resilience rather than defeat. 3. Harvesting alien knowledge with fragments of our alien technology, scattered across Earth, provoked a frenzied race among scientists. Biocatalytic vessels in the Siberian tundra, coated in living metal, were carefully harvested by Russian biochemists. Their early tests showed these vessels could self-repair minor structural damage, a breakthrough for prosthetics and hull design alike. Crystalline energy cores recovered from downed drones in the Australian outback revealed exotic, isotopic compositions. Australian physicists and Japanese materials scientists collaborated to develop experimental power cells, aiming to create portable reactors that might one day replace fossil fuels. Neural mesh interfaces, gleaned from hive ships that crashed off the West African coast, yielded rudimentary data on our alien hive mind communication. Ethicists and neurologists gathered in Geneva to debate their use. Could humanity safely adopt collective linked cognition without sacrificing individual will? The question rattled the world's philosophical foundations. In hidden laboratories from the Mojave desert's repurposed missile silos, to abandoned coal mines beneath Wales, teams worked around the clock. Every discovery promised leaps in medicine, energy, and exploration. Yet every experiment carried the specter of repeating the hubris that had drawn alien eyes to Earth in the first place. 4. Politics of a new era. With the immediate threat extinguished, global politics splintered into uneasy alliances and power vacuums. The coalition of free states, spearheaded by former resistance leaders in Nairobi, Tokyo, and Bogota, pressed for an international charter, the Earth Accord. It demanded shared stewardship of alien technologies, strict non-proliferation, and a unified defense council to guard against future invaders. The National Reclamation Councils, emerging in Washington, Beijing, Brussels, and Moscow, clashed over territorial claims to our alien crash zones and resource-rich ruins. Old tensions flared as each power sought to secure technology for its own strategic edge. Grassroots networks, once secret resistance cells, transformed into civilian oversight committees. In Bogota's rebuilt Plaza de Bolivar, representatives from every social stratum debated how to allocate salvage, rebuild infrastructure, and address the poverty exacerbated by years of war. Diplomatic envoys traversed landscapes still scarred by craters. In Cairo, religious scholars hosted interfaith councils on the ruins of the Great Mosque's courtyard. In Berlin, former members of Project Babel organized open-source conferences on secure communication. Even in the Antarctic research stations, the few scientists left on the ice drafted proposals for a planetary safety protocol, a pact against weaponizing geothermal or orbital energy systems. Again. 5. Healing wounds, mending spirits. The psychological toll of the invasion and counterstrike ran deep. Veterans of the Phoenix mission grappled with survivors' guilt. Children born during the darkest months carried questions beyond their years. In response, communities fostered programs of healing, memory walls, in cities from Montreal to Mumbai. Survivors placed photographs, names, and messages of lost loved ones on public memorials. Under strings of fairy lights salvaged from decimated plazas, people cried, laughed, and sometimes laughed through tears as they shared stories of those who had perished. Phoenix festivals. On July 13th, festivals erupted worldwide. In Sao Paulo, dancers reenacted guerrilla strikes through samba. In Reykjavik, poets recited elegies under the aurora's faint glow. In Melbourne, musicians performed symphonies of defiance, blending classical motifs with electronic pulses derived from our alien harmonics. Counseling networks using the echo grid. Volunteer therapists offered remote sessions to remote villages and besieged outposts. Virtual reality environments modeled on pre-invasion cities allowed patients to relearn joy walking along a pre-war Shibuya crossing or sipping coffee in a sunlit Parisian cafe. Across all these efforts ran a single thread: the need to transform, vengeance into renewal, devastation into a foundation for a better future. 6. The legacy of Furian month. After the Phoenix strike, the world stood at a crossroads. On the ice-crowned peaks of Huascaran, a small monument was erected, an abstract sculpture of twisted metal and ice. Inscribed with the credo "By fire, we rise," delegations from 50 nations journeyed to its inauguration, laying wreaths of volcanic glass and crystalline alloy beneath a sky uncharted by alien dreadnoughts. Dr. Mei Lin spoke at the ceremony, her voice carrying over the frozen winds. "We stood on the brink of oblivion," she said, "and reached into the planet's core for our answer. We paid dearly for our freedom, but in our unity, our sacrifice, we found a strength no conqueror had foreseen. In the assembled crowd were faces that had once been enemies, rival generals shaking hands, scientists trading blueprints, and citizens from nations long divided sharing a silent nod of kinship. For a day, the wounds between them healed just enough to imagine a world reborn. 7. Horizons beyond Earth. As reconstruction began, talk turned inexorably to the stars. Humanity, now recognized by distant observers as a species not to be trifled with, found itself at the threshold of a wider universe. The first expedition, the OON's flagship telescope, had detected faint transmissions far beyond the Aurelian's range echoes of other civilizations. An international consortium pledged to outfit a deep space vessel named Dawn's Resolve to carry Earth's envoy beyond the solar system. Galactic Warning Network. Lessons of the Ascendant Collective spurred the creation of the Sentinel Array, a network of listening posts and defensive satellites, funded by a coalition of governments and private enterprises. Its first beacon, orbiting Mars, would broadcast Earth's hard-won story as both caution and testament. Cultural renaissance. Across media, art and literature, a new genre rose: astro-resistance. Novels, films, and virtual experiences allowed creators to explore themes of defiance and unity on cosmic scales. In Buenos Aires, a playwright premiered Children of the Flame, a drama about orphans of the invasion who became pilots in the war's final hours. 8. The promise of tomorrow. In the weeks and months that followed, humanity rebuilt its cities and recharted its priorities. Energy infrastructures shifted toward geothermal and crystalline power derivatives. Education systems integrated xenotechnology ethics into curricula. Borders became zones of shared research and resource exchange rather than barricades. Above all, the memory of that night when the sky burned with our wrath became a solemn promise. Never again would any species assume we were prey. Never again would we let fear extinguish our will to fight. And never again would we forget how, in unity and sacrifice, we had carved a bolt of flame through the darkness. As the world turned its gaze skyward toward the edge of the solar system, and beyond it did so not with the trembling awe of shrimp before a predator, but with the forging confidence of a people who had learned, in the crucible of vengeance, to rise anew. The cosmos awaited, but Earth's next chapter would be written by a species reborn in fire.